Hello, this is a PowerPoint and good little lesson on how to create a testable question. Let's get started. It's a scientific method or how to write a testable question. Sometimes scientists just like to explore. Exploring or making observations often makes scientists curious about specific questions. To answer these questions, most scientists carry out investigations using the scientific method. The scientific method. Ask a question. That's where you start. It has to be a testable question, one that you could run a test on to see what the real reason or real answer is. Form a hypothesis, which is just a guess. I think the answer to this question is blank. You use your knowledge from stuff you've done before to come up with your guess, though. It's not just random. It's based on things you know. Design an experiment to test your hypothesis. Independent variables, you'll learn about that later, and then controls. Draw conclusions. So from what you did in your experiment, you go, oh, you know what? I think blank. And sometimes the conclusion is, I have no idea. I have to try to run another experiment to see what the real answer is. Or maybe pull in another scientist to run the same experiment to see what the real conclusion really is. What is a testable question? A testable question is one that can be answered by designing and conducting an experiment. Testable questions are always changing one thing to see what the effect is on another thing. Sample testable question. Does changing the height of the ramp affect the speed of the car going down the ramp? Testable question formats. Does changing blank affect blank? So these are good templates. If you're trying to develop your own question, you can just put your variables in these blanks and the thinking is done for you. It shows you exactly the way the question should be formed. Next one says, how does changing blank affect blank? Or, if I change blank, will it affect blank? And the things that go here in the blanks are the variables, and it'll talk more about it in just a few slides. In a scientific experiment, the two blanks have special names. They're called variables. What is a variable? A variable is something that can change! Exclamation point. Testable questions have two parts, an independent variable and a dependent variable. Cause is the independent variable, effect or outcome, that's the dependent variable. What is an independent variable? The variable that will be changed by you, the scientist. A good experiment only has one independent variable. You wouldn't do an experiment on plants and have the soil change every time, have the type of liquid that you water the plants with change every time, and have the container change every time. You only want one thing to be different. So you would say, does the soil that the plant is potted in affect its growth? And the only thing you would change is the soil. You would have the same container, you would give it the same amount of water at the same time every day, you'd put it in the same amount of sun. The only thing in each container would be different soil with the same seeds, same type of seeds. What is the dependent variable? The variable that is being measured in your experiment. The response to the change you make using the independent variable. So in the example before, the dependent variable would be how high the plant grows based on the soil that's in its pot. Every day you'd go out and you'd measure the plant. That's the dependent variable, and you'll see how tall it got. And you compare the plant in sand versus the plant in clay versus the plant in rich soil versus, maybe a mixture of the two or three. Testable question formats. Does changing independent variable affect dependent variable? And so it takes those templates there and it shows you where to put the independent variable and where to put the dependent variable. And I'm going to attach this PowerPoint to a resource folder so you can have access to this and use it when you come up with testable questions. Example, does changing the height of the ramp affect the speed of the car going down the ramp? What is the independent variable in this question? Remember, the independent variable is the only one you're allowed to change. So this keyword right here, changing, kind of clues you in on what the independent variable is. Ding, 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 the height of the ramp. What is the dependent variable? And remember, the dependent variable is the thing you're going to measure. So does it affect the speed of the car going down the ramp? The speed is what you'd measure in the experiment. Another testable question. Does changing the amount of light affect the growth rate of plants? Identify the independent and the dependent variable. Go back. So the independent variable for does changing, remember, independent's the only one you're allowed to change. Does changing the amount of light affect the growth rate of plants? So the independent variable is the amount of light. What's the dependent variable? The growth rate of the plants. That's the one that you're going to measure. The dependent variable is. Next. Does the temperature of water affect the time it takes a sugar cube to dissolve? What is the independent variable? The one that you change, remember, so the one that's going to change every time is the temperature of the water. You're going to put the sugar cube in ice cold water, lukewarm water, boiling hot water. So then if the temperature is the independent variable, what is the dependent variable? That would be the time that you would be measuring. Remember, dependent variable is the one you measure. It's the time it takes for the sugar cube to dissolve. So in this experiment, you might have a stopwatch in your hand, and each time you put the sugar cube in, you're measuring how long it takes for it to dissolve in that certain type of water. Is this a testable question? What makes plants grow best? Can you identify two variables in this question? I see plants and I see grow, but really I don't see two different variables, one being measurable and one being changing. So I'm not sure that this is a testable question. How to turn a general question into a testable question. First, read the question carefully. What makes plants grow best? Next, think of a cause and an effect related to your question. What makes plants grow best? In this case, the idea is that you can change something to affect something about how a plant grows. So grows right here, the word grows makes me think dependent variable, but we still don't know what the independent variable is that we're going to be measuring, or changing rather, because I know we will be measuring the plant growth for the dependent variable, but what will be changing for the independent variable? What makes plants grow best? Examples: amounts of water, amounts of light, soil type. What makes plants grow best? Examples: height of the plant, speed of the growth. So that is the dependent variable you could measure. You could measure how many days it takes it to grow to 2 feet. You could measure each day that the amount of growth it makes in each day. Finally, plug the cause and effect into the format. What is the effect of blank on blank? The cause goes in the first blank and the effect goes in the second blank. So a testable question looks like this. What is the effect of soil type on plant height? Controls. Controls are all the factors in your experiment that you want to remain constant. Constant means you don't touch it, you don't change it. What is the effect of soil type on plant height? Controls for the plant experiment. Types of plant, growing conditions, sunlight, temperature, etc. Amount of water, type of container. So if you're going to do the changing the soil type, remember I talked about it earlier, you don't change the container you put the plant in. You don't change the location of where each plant goes. You keep everything constant, everything exactly the same, because if you change one thing for only a few of the plants, then you don't know whether the soil was the reason that it grew, or whether it was the fact that you put some of them on one side of the yard and some of them on the other. You need to make sure that the type of the plant, the growing conditions, the water, the container, those are all exactly the same. That way you know you have a better understanding or better reason to think that the growth was based upon the soil type. Here's another example. Is it testable? How does a paper airplane fly? Decide what you are going to change. What's going to be the independent variable? What's changing? For example, are you going to change the size of the plane, the style of the plane, the type of paper? Decide what you are going to measure, the dependent variable. Distance the plane will fly, length of time the plane stays in the air. Those are all the things you could measure and mark down on your paper. Now select one independent variable and one dependent variable. Put them together to create a testable question. How does the type of paper affect the distance a paper airplane flies? Controls. So if you're only changing one thing, which is the paper, every single other part of the experiment has to stay the same. The style of the airplane is a control. It cannot change. You have to make every example, no matter the different types of paper, they all have to be made the same way. Flying conditions, the wind. You have to make sure you're in a room with no wind. How you throw the airplane, you have to make sure every time it's exactly the same. Those are all controls. Final thoughts. Keep your experiment simple and clear. Check out the library or our web links for ideas. Don't wait. Some projects take time.